So I'm just going to let you know that you're all on mute at the moment, just in case you're trying to speak. My name is Hedda, and you're joining us with Clean Coasts. And I have my colleague here, Camilla, with me as well. She's helping out this evening. And we're just speaking to Dave Wall from the National Biodiversity Data Centre. So we're just recording this for this evening. You're on mute at the moment, just because we have so many people on the call. We're going to do a little bit of an interview, and then after about 15 or 20 minutes, we'll open up to some questions and answers. So if you have questions, if you think of them while Dave is speaking, you can put them into the chat, and Camilla will keep an eye on the chat. Or if you want to just ask a question at the end, you can raise your hand and you'll be able to ask a question. We may not get to everybody, but we'll get to as many people as we can. So we'll maybe just wait another moment as people are still joining. Do we have people still joining, Camilla?
Yeah, but there's just a couple of people still joining in every couple of seconds. So I'd say give it another minute and I'll let you know.
While you're waiting, if you want to, you can just put into the chat. If you can find the chat at the bottom, there's a little, at the bottom of your screen, there should be a little icon like a speech bubble. So if you want to put into the chat where you're joining from, or if you're part of a Clean Coasts group, or where your nearest beach is. So if there's anything that you'd like to just say hello in the chat, seeing as we have you all on mute at the moment. So will we get going? I think we're good to go, Camilla.
Just still one or a couple of people coming in every few seconds. So I'd say maybe another 1 minute and we'll get started.
We've been doing things all about citizen science this week at Clean Coasts. So on Monday, we spoke to Sarah Collar from Ocean Conservancy, and she was telling us all about the new Clean Swell app, and you can use that to log litter that you're collecting with your groups. So if you didn't already get a chance to look at that, you'll be able to get a recording of that, or you'll be able to get it on our YouTube at some stage. So that's another webinar that we did this week. Okay, so we might just get going. So as people join as well, we'll maybe just let them know that they're on mute and they're being recorded. So like I said, we're doing stuff on citizen science this week for Clean Coasts, and today we're really delighted to have Dave from the National Biodiversity Data Centre here. So we're going to ask him questions about weird stuff that we're finding on the beach, and Dave is telling us all about citizen science, and there's some really interesting resources you can use. And you can get out there and collect some data if you're lucky enough at the moment to be near the coast. And if not, at least these are some things you'll know about for in future. So I'm just going to run through a couple of things about Clean Coasts, just in case you're not familiar with Clean Coasts. So Clean Coasts have over 1,200 Clean Coast groups all around the country. And you can take part in these groups and you can help by collecting litter on your beaches. And also we have some different educational campaigns. So think before you flush, and the 2-minute beach clean, and also the big beach clean that takes place together with Ocean Conservancy once a year. And also we collect data about litter, marine litter that people collect around the country. So I won't talk too much about Clean Coasts right now because we have Dave here and we have loads of stuff that we want to hear from him. So I will just maybe stop sharing my screen now. And you should be able to see maybe you can choose yourself if you want to use the view. Up in the right-hand corner, you'll see a little option for view. So you can either look at speaker view or you can look at gallery view. So if you want to have gallery view, you'll get to see other people on the call. And if you have speaker view, you'll just see whoever's speaking at the moment. And like I said, feel free to add into the chat if you want to. So Dave, you are the Citizen Science Officer at the National Biodiversity Data Centre. So what exactly does that mean, or what do you get to do in your day job?
Yes, I am the Citizen Science Officer and not, in fact, an air traffic controller as I look. What do I do in my job? Well, I suppose specifically, my role is to manage two projects, citizen science projects. The first is a marine citizen science project, which is really the main thing we're here to discuss this evening, which is Explore Your Shore. But I also do a freshwater citizen science project, which is Dragonfly Ireland, which unsurprisingly looks at dragonflies and damselflies. But I also have a role in the overall, looking at the overall citizen science strategy at the data center. I suppose I first got involved in citizen science in about realistically in 1995, when I started doing volunteer surveying with the Irish Fen Dolphin Group in the Shannon Estuary. So that's a long time ago. I'm very old, apparently. But I suppose I started managing citizen science projects back in 2001, when we started doing a citizen science project on car ferries traveling from, at the time, from Ireland to Liverpool, and then from Ireland to France for the Irish Fen Dolphin Group.
So I might just stop you before we go further. And for anybody who hasn't heard of citizen science before, or they're unsure of what it might mean, could you tell us very briefly what is citizen science?
I can tell you what is citizen science. Citizen science, well, maybe I have a few old pictures I can throw up here, which would be handy to look at. And why we use citizen science indeed might be a good thing. Okay, so if I share my screen here, this is where we all hope the technology works. There we go. Okay, can everyone see that?
Yes, I can see it.
Everyone can see something anyway. So if we talk about why do we use citizen science, what is citizen science? So basically, citizen science is volunteers collecting data. I suppose that's maybe the most simplistic description of what citizen science is. So that can range from someone submitting a casual record of a blackbird that they see in their garden, up to people conducting quite complicated survey protocols on a regular basis as part of a citizen science monitoring program. And of course, citizen science doesn't just relate to biodiversity, it can relate to the whole realm of science. So you could be analyzing data or whatever it is, but all on a voluntary basis. Usually the commonality with citizen science is its mass participation. So why would we do this? Why wouldn't we just leave science to the scientists, as it were? Well, I suppose the big bonuses of citizen science are you can achieve the kind of geographical and spatial coverage that you could never hope to achieve in a project-based science survey, let's say. So if you're a private individual, if you're a university, you can't hope to gain the kind of scope you can gain through using citizen science. So here, for example, on the slide is all the common data, which is a type of dragonfly records we've collected from across Ireland over the last decade. Now, to achieve that kind of spatial coverage, let's say as a private contractor, as a consultant, would cost an astronomical amount of money. We just couldn't afford to do it. But through using the power of citizen science, many feet on the ground at the same time, we can achieve that spatial coverage. In Ireland especially, and in Europe, we use citizen science quite often to achieve long temporal scales for monitoring. So although citizen science, in fact, is better at short-term, intensive but wide-scale projects, a lot of it gets used for long-term projects because most EU funding, most government funding only lasts for 2 or 3 years. So if you want to run your survey over many, many years, as many monitoring projects do, then citizen science is the only realistic way to do it. It's cost effective, but it's not free. You get out of citizen science proportional to what you invest into it, and that includes in terms of money. And it's also used widely because it's a good way of achieving or adding meaningful community engagement to various projects. So in my previous job to this, I worked for Ulster Wildlife, and my main role was community engagement around the Northern Irish coast. But for that, we use citizen science as a tool to get people involved and thinking about the sea.
Brilliant. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about the different initiatives that you have for citizen science around the coast, because a lot of the people listening this evening are part of the Clean Coast groups, or they're the kind of people, they like to be out by the shore anyway, and they're maybe noticing things anyway on the tide line or in rock pools. So tell us about the different initiatives for collecting data around the coast.
Okie dokie. Well, let's go to another page. Says he, desperately trying to find the right page. Okay, I'll try this way.
That's the map.
That is the map, so we get rid of that. We get rid of my emails because you don't want to read those. And we throw up this. So, Explore Your Shore is what we've named our marine citizen science project. So this began at the start of 2019. Explore Your Shore is a citizen science project that's funded by the Environmental Protection Agency and is a project of the National Biodiversity Data Centre. What are our goals and aims and hopes and dreams and wishes? Well, they include building a baseline data set for Ireland, especially in terms of intertidal species. You may think that at this stage in the game, we would have extremely good data sets for all our species because we've been around and recording ecological data for so long. But in fact, when it comes to marine data, we've always been the poor cousin of data recording in Ireland. And we've very few marine data compared to terrestrial data. So building a baseline data set, the EPA in particular, and us too, are interested in exploring marine species as bioindicators of climate change and water quality. So climate change, because marine species don't have barriers to movement. So they're one of the most reactive groups of species to climate change. As the water temperature changes, you will see shifts in species or reactions to those species because they've no physical barriers. They've no mountain ranges in their way or rivers or desert blocking their way. And as well as that, water quality, marine species obviously depend on the quality of the environment around them, and that includes water quality. So they're very susceptible and reactive to changes in water quality. And we also want to raise public awareness and engagement of the marine and marine biodiversity data recording, because it's the fundamental foundations, I suppose, of everything we do in the marine. And in terms of marine conservation or development in the marine, is a need for understanding of what's out there. A lot of people look out to sea, not any of you guys, I'm sure, but many people look out to sea, they see a grey sea under a grey sky, and they've no real appreciation for what that sea contains. They think of it maybe as a dark, murky place with very little in it, maybe water above, sand below, and a few fish swimming around. But in fact, as we know, it's actually a huge, vast ecosystem with many different types of habitats, every bit as diverse as the terrestrial ecosystem. So it's making the public aware of that is one of our goals. Everything we do in exploreyourshore.ie or Explore Your Shore is on our website or focused through our website, exploreyourshore.ie, and that's where you'll find all the information relating to the project. So on a basic level, on a practical level, what we're actually looking for people to do is get involved. We've designed 4 projects looking either at different habitats or different styles of collecting marine biodiversity data. We have Seashore Spotter, which is the most basic. It's casual sightings. So you're down the beach walking the dog, or you're surfing, or you're swimming, or you're just chilling out on the coast, and you see something and you want to record it, whether it be a crab or an anemone or a dolphin or whatever it is. You can click on exploreyourshore.ie. You can click on the National Biodiversity Data Centre app, log into that and record your sighting. The Big Beach Biodiversity Survey focuses on, unsurprisingly, things we find on the beach. So one of the habitats we've spent a lot of time is walking along beaches. We're looking for people to record stuff they find basically washed up on the beach. So the main focus of the survey is bivalves, because we've very little actual bivalve distribution data in our data sets currently. But you can record anything, seaweeds, other sorts of flotsam and jetsam. what you find on the beach will generally be fairly representative of what's in the adjacent waters, and that's the idea there. So for Seashore Spotter, it's casual. For Big Beach Biodiversity Survey and the other surveys, what we're doing is we're adding the element of effort. So we're recording how much effort you put into the recording. So we can relate the number of species, let's say, per hour, and get an index of what the relative biodiversity is compared to the effort put in. Seashore snapshots, I'll not go into too deeply here, but basically it's taking photos of barnacles and limpets and submitting them to us just as photos, and then someone else does the analysis of that. So if you want a really easy one to dip into, all you have to do is go down the shore. We've got printable frames. You take pictures at a required resolution, submit them to us, and then that data will get analyzed elsewhere. So you don't need to even know what species you're taking pictures of. And then the Rocky Shore Safari is basically like the Big Beach Biodiversity Survey, except we're looking at rocky shore habitats. And they are some of the most biodiverse habitats in Ireland. Incredible richness of diversity on the intertidal.
Yeah, and these resources are brilliant because I actually didn't realize they existed until I started looking at the stuff for this webinar. And I definitely want to go and do some of these surveys now because they look really straightforward. Like this one, the Rocky Shore one is great because you can go along and they're really things you can notice straight away and tick them off. And I love the one for the barnacles because you get like this little frame and you can put down the frame and take a photo. So they all look really like straightforward and usable. And like something that you said to me, Dave, I was surprised by that you said, you know, we just don't have that baseline. We don't even know what's there, or we don't know what we will have lost if we lose things. So yeah, they're really nice tools for people to use.
We don't. It's a big problem because we've nothing to compare. You know, even when we get this baseline, we've really very little to compare it to. To give you an idea of what a difference it can make, in the other survey I managed, the Dragonfly survey, there was a Dragonfly survey back in 2000 to 2003. So we're able to compare the data we're collecting now with that baseline data set from 2000 to 2003. And we find some pretty large differences, especially in terms of global warming, species, range expansion, and things like that. But we don't have that same baseline data set for the marine. And that's a huge problem. If you want to understand how things are changing, you need a baseline data set. And I might talk about that later in terms of what some of the threats to marine species are. One of them is shifting baselines, essentially, but I'll talk about that later. An important thing to mention is it's not just us. We were conscious when we set this project up that we certainly were not the first people to be collecting biodiversity data, marine biodiversity data in Ireland, and we still aren't. So we have several partner projects we encourage people to participate in. So for example, if you're out diving, we don't really want your diving records. We'd rather you record with Sea Search Ireland because they're the main group that have been recording and using underwater volunteers to do ecological surveys, if you like, or citizen science recording under the water for many, many years. If you see a whale or a dolphin or a porpoise, really we'd rather you record that with the Irish Whale and Dolphin Group because they have an excellent system set up for recording and validating those records as they come in. Pearl Search Ireland similarly collects data about shark ray egg cases around the coast. Coast Watch for many, many years, since the 80s, have been doing an eco audit of the coastline every autumn, every September, October. And that incorporates not just biodiversity, but also water quality and other environmental impacts on the shore. The Irish Basking Shark Project, you'll never guess, they study basking sharks and they collect records on those. And UCC's big jellyfish hunt, you had Tom Doyle on earlier in the year and he told you all about that. And that project, again, is an excellent format and system for collecting jellyfish data. And jellyfish are actually one of the groups that are most frequently recorded, I suppose because they're very obvious and they're also quite striking to look at and relatively easy to identify. And then we also have a project in NUIG, which is looking at kelp and the value of kelp forests around the coast. So we'd encourage people to go in and explore. What we're trying to do really is offer a shop front for biodiversity data recording in Ireland. but by no means to set up ourselves up as the be all and end all. Really, we want people to explore all the different ways you can record biodiversity data.
And would you be able to tell us what happens with this data? So if you're collecting all of this data, where does it go, or what difference does it make?
I would. Now, this involves some more clicking onto yet another page. So let me see.
And we'll share any of these. We'll send out an email after the webinar, maybe tomorrow. And if anybody wants any of these links or any of the resources that Dave has been speaking about, that will be in the website, in the email. So don't worry if you're not catching all of that information.
Yeah. So basically, when you go to record data, it comes onto all the data we collect comes in through the National Biodiversity Data Centre's online portal. So we have a citizen science portal, and our database is split into two, if you like. So the incoming data is unvalidated data. So that's the raw citizen science data, the records that are submitted by everyone who's recording out there. Then that data goes through a validation process. So that will vary depending on what species it is. So on a basic level, if you're recording, so if I click on start record here, and let's say I go to marine because I am very biased in that department, what you will find is you're encouraged to answer a particular set of questions. And really what we're looking for is the basic information that enables us to form a record and to validate that record. So really for marine biodiversity data recording, we need to know who you are, just because we may need to contact you, not because we are interested in who you are as such. We need to know where you saw the thing you saw, somewhere around the coast. And we have a map that enables you to click on it and automatically fill in that information. We need to know what species you saw or your best guess at that species, how many, what type of observation. And we also need a photograph. The reason for marine, we kind of really require a photograph for each record is just the sheer diversity of marine species out there and the kind of lowest level of recognition of those species means that without a photograph, it's very hard for us to validate that information or validate those records. So we really ask you to submit a photo of each record you submit. When we get that in, I get it. It arrives in a spreadsheet, and then we put it through data validation. So that can vary from, for dragonflies, it involves a 6-step process because I validate it. We have a second validator does it. Each of those involves a 4-step process, and then it goes on to a national coordinator who does the ultimate final validation. So some validation processes are extremely rugged, but all validation processes basically look to see that your contact information, your location information are correct, and that the thing you think you saw is what you say it is. So we'll look at the photos, and if you say it's a crab and there's a picture of a narwhal in front of us, we'll go, well, maybe it's not a crab. But more than often, or more usually the case, whatever you say it is what's in the photo. So that's what happens. Once that data has been validated, then it goes into our biodiversity maps data set. So people sometimes get a bit confused because our citizen science map differs to, so the map you see on the citizen science portal differs to the biodiversity maps. And that's because the data going into the citizen science portal is unvalidated and the data in the biodiversity maps system is validated. So that's the kind of ultimate data. It's all been cleaned and it's the data we can stand over, and that's what goes into our final mapping system. And that's what's available for everyone to download off the website. So it's an open access data policy.
Great. And do you share it internationally as well? Then are there international groups compiling all of this information?
We do. I mean, we share it. Obviously, being open access data, anyone can download it and do as they wish with it. We usually ask or request that people at least acknowledge where they got the stuff. But we are also the Irish node for the Global Biodiversity Information Facility. So that is, I'll just show you their map at the bottom, which is quite amazing. So there are all the records they have, which is kind of mind-blowing. So the Global Biodiversity Information Facility is basically a biodiversity data center for the world. So many different data centers feed into GBIF, and then all of that data gets mapped. And that's just one international portal. We also share data with other marine data portals. Basically, anyone who requests it, we share the data with them. So it gets used in many different ways by many different groups. It doesn't just sit on our website looking pretty. That's the idea.
Great. I have a feeling that we have a lot of questions. People want to know different things. So I don't know, is there anything, Dave, that you'd like to say or share before we go to the Q&A?
Well, I suppose a couple of things. You know, how does the data get used? A few examples there might be, you know, the current marine data that we receive. Obviously, for the Dragonfly data, we're already looking at its use as indicators of climate change and what it can tell us about that. For the marine data, we're really, the big thrust is to try and build that baseline data set. But if you go to some of the other data sets that marine data sets that are on the National Biodiversity Data Centre website, for example, one that I've been involved in for many years is collection of cetacean data, whale and dolphin data. Those data have been used multiple times in multiple projects. They've been used for academic research. They've been used for national conservation policy, not just here, but in the UK and in Europe, because most marine surveys cross borders on a frequent basis. They've been used to generate new ways of interpreting citizen science data for conservation. They've been used to prepare atlases for the distribution of whale and dolphin and porpoise sightings in Ireland. They've been used to help report to Europe on conservation status of whales, dolphins, and porpoises. And the same kind of uses apply across the board to almost any of the data sets that come in. They're not just static things that come in and get, you know, kind of mothballed in the data center. They're there as a living resource, and they're constantly available for use, and they are used by multiple data users. The other thing I think we wanted to touch on was, you know, in terms of marine conservation and marine species, what are the issues? What are the, why are we collecting this data? Why should we care? I suppose is always one question that comes up. I suppose there's many answers to that, and I could spend the rest of the night, but I won't, talking about these things. I suppose a few slides might help. Just some of my pet peeves about marine conservation and some of the issues we face. If you're looking at why are we looking to try and form a baseline data set, one of the issues, and maybe one of the, if not the most serious issue in marine conservation, is the issue of shifting baselines. So what's a shifting baseline? Well, a baseline is what you accept as being the norm at any point in time. So for marine species, it's always been an issue. Our data sets are so poor. If you don't have constant monitoring, then you don't notice what's changing over time. A good example is, here's 4 pictures from a Florida, I believe, sea angling company. And they started taking catch photos back in the 1950s. And you can see here in the first picture, here they are, 1957. They've come in from a fishing trip, and you can see they've a load of Goliath grouper, I presume these things are, a load of big fish, a load of big sharks, and a few tiddlers. Look at it through 1958. See already the decline that's happened there. 1965, look at the difference. There's one big fish and mostly tiddlers. And by 1970, 1980, it's all tiddlers and even smaller fish beyond being tiddlers. But the point is, if you started surveying or monitoring in 1979, that's what you'd accept as being the normal. That's what you'd accept as being what a normal marine ecosystem looks like. whereas it's not. I mean, it's what it looked like in 1957. I dare say it's actually what it looked like in 1857 or maybe even 1757. We've been impacting our oceans. A lot of people think of the ocean as a wilderness, untouched and unmarred by human hand and ready to be explored and wondered at. But in fact, we've been impacting the ocean for thousands of years. If you think back to 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 years ago, they were already overfishing some species in the Mediterranean. If you think back just 100 or 200 years ago, commercial steam trawling began in European waters. And immediately after that, we started seeing major impacts on marine ecosystems. So the need to have a baseline data set is very important. We need to establish what we have now so we can understand whether things are getting better or getting worse, and whether any actions we take to improve the situation are actually having an impact. So shifting baselines is a major issue. And incidentally, it's not just Florida. Here's a couple of pictures from Tralee Bay in the 1960s. What you see there is the results of one-day sea angling in Tralee Bay. What's piled up on the beach there are sharks. And you have blue sharks, and a lot of what you see there are actually angel sharks. And if you know anything about your marine species at the moment, is that angel sharks are pretty much functionally extinct around the Irish coast at this stage. They're pretty much gone. They've been wiped out largely by the impacts of well, in some cases overfishing. As you can see in this case, that would have a significant impact on a local population of sharks, but also by the impacts of bottom trawling on habitats and nursing grounds, and also tangle netting has also had a major impact on these species. So in Ireland too, we've had issues. If you went to Tralee Bay today and looked at it, you wouldn't see any of this. And you might just say, well, that's what Tralee Bay looks like, but it's what it looks like today, but not then. In terms of climate change, Ireland lies on the boundary of a biogeographical kind of interface. Now that's all very long and complicated, but what it means essentially is we're on the boundary between cold temperate waters to the north and warm temperate waters to the south. So we're in a very good position to monitor the impacts of climate change because we're on the edge of, we're at the most northerly edge of the range of warm temperate water species and the most southerly edge of the range of cold temperate water species. Here's one example. This is the common sunstar, which is cold temperate water species. And you can see that these are sightings from the last decade. It has a largely northerly distribution. So you can imagine that if climate change is causing sea warming, this is one species we might expect to lose over the next few decades or century. In terms of water quality, you can luckily for us, we're on the Atlantic coast. We've plenty of big seas, lots of well-mixed water. So by and large around the coast, water quality is good. But we all know places water quality is not so hot. And once you get near to the coast, and especially once you get within bays and estuaries, you start having impacts of poorer water quality. Here's some extremes. You can see, for example, green algae thrive in enriched water conditions. So incidentally do jellyfish. So there's some possible bioindicators for poor water quality, whereas species like seagrass require quite good water quality conditions. So they're good candidates as bioindicators of areas where there's good water quality. So that's the kind of thing we're looking at and examining. One other thing I'll mention just briefly is invasive species. Another thing that people may or may not be aware of is the fact that every year, because we're in a global economy, because ships are coming and going, because of climate change, although invasive isn't really specifically linked to climate change, that's more of a climate change related shifts. You know, in the ballast of ships, you can have the larvae of different species coming in. And one of those species is this species, which is wireweed. It used to be called Japanese wireweed, but we stopped blaming the Japanese for this because it's not their fault. So it's just wireweed. But it came from Asia and it probably came in the ballast of ships. And this is a area up off the local to me, actually, in County Down. And you can just see here's an area where wireweed has absolutely taken over. It's not a native species. It's not part of the natural flora of this marine ecosystem. And yet it's now the predominant species in that ecosystem. And that has impacts on biodiversity, has impacts on the diversity of marine algae, other seaweed species present. And because all those seaweed species are linked into other species of invertebrates and fish, it has an impact right through the food chain. What the scale of that impact is, we're still trying to find out. So they're just some of the issues. I don't want to depress people, just give you a bit of an overview of what some of the issues we're looking at are, and why there is such an urgent need to develop a good baseline data set so we understand what's happening in our coastal ecosystems.
That's brilliant. It's really interesting to hear all of that. Thanks, Dave. So we might move over to some questions then. Camilla, do you have some questions lined up for us?
Yep. So
Dave, I just say, Dave, do you want to stop sharing your screen and we can go to the gallery view then? So if anybody wants
That'd
to
be good.
People, you can change your view to gallery, so you should be able to see a few faces.
So there's quite a lot of comments, and just running through some of them here. I'll try to get through as many of them as I can. So Breed said, what if we've no idea what it is that we see? Can we take a fairly informed guess at it and send it in?
I like that question, because I have this constant debate with Liam, who's the center director, and you know, previously the data center adopted quite a strong policy for a good reason, for terrestrial data collection, that people knew most of the terrestrial species, not in all groups, but in many groups. So they and they had an abundance of records, many thousands of records, for example, mammals and plants. So there was good reason to kind of make sure that whatever data we received in was as accurate as possible. And so there was a requirement there that you had to get it down to species. Now for marine, there's two issues. One is that we want all the data we can get our hands on. The second is that because of the sheer diversity of marine species, it's a very challenging area for species identification, as I'm sure many people will know. It takes a long time to develop confidence in marine species identification. So what I would say is give it your best shot and be assured that I'll put a what you call a qualifier on that. Give it your best shot and take a good photo, because as long as you give us your best shot at ID, guess to what it is, and have a good photo attached during validation, we will be able to determine what that species is. So don't worry about it. As long as you've submitted a photo, we can validate that record. What I'm toying with in the near future, maybe before Christmas, is putting a I don't know button on the data form. So basically, if you've no bogging notion what the thing is, you can just click that I don't know what this is, but submit the photo anyway. Because essentially I go through all the photos. So at the moment, I don't see the difference. If it comes to a stage where we're receiving 6,000 records a month, things may change, because obviously capacity is an issue then. But at the moment, I want all records. So give it your best shot at the moment. Have a guess at what it is. Don't be too concerned if you don't know or if you get it wrong, because we'll pick that up through during data validation, and your record will still be a valid one.
Thanks, Dave. We'll do a few more questions from the chat, and then if we have time, we might open it up to if people want to ask questions themselves. So Camilla, do you have any other questions?
Yeah, so Alex said, is the government involved in this project? And if so, what are they doing against many of the issues we have on our shores?
Well, the government is involved in this project in terms of the National Biodiversity Data Centre is funded by the government. We're funded through the Heritage Council, which itself is funded by the government. The project itself is funded by the EPA, which again is another government agency, funded through government. So yes, on that level for this specific project, our funding is ultimately government funding. Our government tackling some of the issues, well, I think anyone could tell you that in some cases they might be, and in some cases they might not be so well, perhaps. Like any issues in terms of conservation, there's a whole plethora of issues out there. Some are being tackled, some aren't. But our specific role, and I suppose sometimes people go, well, what is the purpose of the Biodiversity Data Centre? Our specific role is to gather data. So we're not a conservation body. We're not a, we're not a planning body. We're not any of these things. We're here to collect data, and then everyone can use that data. Any data that comes in through our citizen science portal is public access, so anyone can use that data. So the main reason we're here is collect data that can then be used by numerous groups for whatever reason in relation to not just marine data, but terrestrial as well.
Perfect. Sorry, thanks, Dave. And I'm just looking through a few more of these questions. So Gary said, can animals adapt to invasive species over time?
Well, yeah, it's a good question. I suppose the reality is invasive species aren't all high impact. So what you find is some species are invasive, but seem to have very little impact on the marine ecosystem. And of course, we've had invasive species for years. It's not necessarily a recent thing. If you think of seaweeds, for example, we have a thing around our coast of seaweed called oyster thief. Oyster thief is this weird ball-shaped seaweed, which is basically a big puff ball of air, which grows in the bottom and looks like a deflated green football. And that is an invasive species from the Pacific, but it came in, it came into Europe probably 100 years ago or more, maybe 200 years ago. It's been in Ireland probably since the 70s, I'm thinking. And it seems to have very little impact, really, other than the reason it's called oyster thief is it had this habit of growing on oyster beds, and small ones latch onto oysters and then they grow to large size, and then they were found floating out at sea with the oysters still attached. So people thought there were seaweeds stealing oysters from oyster beds, but it's just a side track of what the lifestyle they have, So that's why they're called oyster thief. But they've no major impact on ecology that we can notice, and essentially they're now part of the marine macroalgae species flora of Ireland. But you look at species like wireweed and it's more of an issue. Wireweed is incredibly invasive. It shifts very easily from location to location, and where it does take root, it tends to proliferate and outgrow every other seaweed species, especially in shallower waters. So there's a species that has much more of an impact, and we still don't necessarily understand the full impact of wireweed on native flora and fauna. And indeed, for wireweed, it's too late. There's no real way of stopping it now. It's right around the Irish coast. So species, I'm not sure that native species adapt as such. I'm sure they do to some degree. But definitely some invasive species are a lot more problematic than others. Some are quite benign. Do native species adapt? I'm sure they do in time, but to what degree, again, will vary depending on the impact of the invasive.
Perfect. And I'll just say, lots of people are sharing some of their citizen science apps that they use and find useful. So you might want to just have a look through yourselves there at some of those that are mentioned.
The only thing I would say about when you make a decision on which citizen science app to use is to understand and make sure you know where that data is going and how it's validated. So if you're collecting citizen science data that goes to a German app, do the German data holders then share it back to someone in Ireland, or maybe to GBIF, so that it's out there and available. It's very important, I think, for citizen science that your data is used. So if your data is collected, it goes to an app, it should be open access data. It should come back to national data users, whether that be through the National Biodiversity Data Set or through Centre or through GBIF or someone equivalent. So that's the only consideration I'd say for when you're selecting an app to use, because there's a whole range of different apps out there.
And yeah, that's really an important one, I suppose. It's making sure you know where the data is going, and if you can access it then as well. Just on that, Sean said, what was the name of the app that you were discussing earlier?
Okay, so the National Biodiversity Data Centre's own app is just biodiversity. So you kind of Google. Now, if you actually, the easiest way to find it is to go to our website and just click on recording, and there's a link to the apps there. So that's the easiest way to find it and download it. It's a fairly basic app, but it does what it says in the tin. It allows you, when you're in the field, to take a picture, record some details, and submit that to us, or to store it for upload when you get home. What it doesn't allow you to do is to take a picture out in the field and then go home and enter in all the information, because it'll just take the location from home. So for some surveys, you really need to use the website to upload your data. So if you're doing, for example, a big beach clean survey, or you're a big beach biodiversity survey, or you're doing a Rocky Shores safari survey, you're really going to need to use the website data form to upload those data. But you can use those in the field because they're all smartphone compatible. So if you have data connectivity.
Perfect. And I think at this stage we might just, I might just unmute everybody just to see if anyone else has any more questions. Sorry, just give me 1 second.
Yeah, maybe I'll just share my screen in the meantime, because we got a couple of pictures that people sent in that they were interested to know. So can you see that slide I'm sharing of some pictures?
Yep.
Yep.
So Keith Scanlon sent these in of things that he found on the beach. So Dave, you might be able to just let us know briefly what this thing
Super duper. So the one on the left, I hope it's the one on the left, it's either my left or your right, is a brown crab. So that's the one you eat for your dinner if you're going into a restaurant and having crab. Fascinating animals, undervalued, I think. You know, some of these crabs have been recorded walking 200 miles across the seabed. They've been tagged and caught 200 miles away from where they were released. So they have a fascinating ecology. The other one is the egg case of a shark species. In this particular case, it's these guys. It's the egg cases, the mermaid's purses of the small spotted cat shark or lesser spotted dogfish, whichever your preference is. They're both the same thing. Incredibly common around the Irish coastline. You'll find them on almost every shore because it's a very common species. But you can also find egg cases from skates and rays, which are these kind of rectangular looking ones. And we have several species of those, up to the mega egg cases of the common skate. So there's my hand, there's the egg case. So some of these are quite monstrous in size when you get to see them. So that's what those two are.
Great. And we have another picture.
This one, yeah, this one's a spiny starfish. So quite unusual to find in a way on the intertidal. It's more usually found during diving surveys. So I don't often see it in the intertidal, but you'll see it caught in the odd rock pool, all right. And if you pick it up, you'll see it's covered in these short, kind of blunt spines.
Great. So I'll stop sharing my screen now, and if people have some questions that they would like to, maybe you can, there's a raise hand function in the participant panel, or you can just maybe stick up your hand, or
people can unmute themselves as well.
It's just like school. Oh, here's Gary. I'm in trouble now. He's going to ask me something I don't know the answer to.
I did. Thanks so much. No, it was really good. Is there another? I know you had the Explore Your Shore event was advertised. Is there another kind of campaign? And just to talk about the regulations as well with the social distancing and limiting. Is there any other?
Is there another what?
Oh, sorry. Is there? Remember last time you had the nationwide campaign Explore Your Shore?
Yeah.
Is there any other nationwide event planning coming up?
Well, I mean, the project continues. We haven't stopped. It's still going strong. What we can't do, unfortunately, at the moment with COVID, is run workshops just because of social distancing issues. So we had to cancel all our workshops this year. So what we're doing in recognition of this is quite likely, well, it's been looking like it's likely to continue through or much of next year, is we are developing more online resources. So for example, next week, I'm doing I'm not doing, a video of me is doing a virtual sea safari, Rocky Shore safari for the Ballymun Science Festival. So I spent the last 2 weeks, like in Egypt, walking up and down the shore, talking to myself, getting looked at like I was a half-wit. I've edited that together into about a half hour, and basically I'm bringing people out to the Rocky Shore, but they don't have to leave their house. And unfortunately, it's not as much fun as a real Rocky Shore safari or a real workshop, but unfortunately, it looks like that's what we're going to be restricted to doing for the foreseeable future. So we're going to develop more of those kind of resources, basically more of looking at me blathering on about marine stuff, but I'll try my damnedest to make it as interesting as possible, and not to kill everyone's enthusiasm through the wonders of YouTube.
Great. We have Neve has a hand up, and then I'll go to Ferguson. Sean, is it? So
Yeah.
Maybe we'll take Neve's question first.
Just a quick question for Dave. Excellent presentation. I was walking along a beach and I saw about a meter of green seaweed between the sand and the water. Is that an indicator of good or bad water quality? I've never seen so much in length, that length.
Depends what it is. Depends what the seaweed is or why. Was it growing or was it just cast up?
It was just cast up.
Yeah. I mean, it very much depends. If it's green algae, totally green algae, such as we saw last year on Bull Island from time to time, that's probably not a great indicator. But often when you get lots of cast up seaweed, it's just a factor of prevailing wind and weather conditions. You get a strong, let's say on the East Coast, we're not used to seeing lots of cast up seaweed, whereas on the West Coast, they look at us on the East Coast going, what are you on about? The beaches are piled high with seaweed every year. But when we get an easterly wind on the East Coast, we get the whole mother load of seaweed cast up. And this stuff can pile up to, several feet high. There's an awfully large biomass of seaweed out there. So in the right weather conditions and when it's been torn up by storms, it can all get cast up. It doesn't really mean good or bad. It just means that that's the prevailing weather that's done that. And of course, as you're coming into the autumn, winter, a lot of seaweed dies back anyway. So you get more of this cast up seaweed in the autumn and through the winter.
Thanks.
Sean?
Oh, hiya. How's it going? Dave, I have a question for you the other day. I don't know, you see.
Go on. Oh, I love this. What's that?
You see it?
Hold on. I'm going to make you bigger by the wonder of... I think I can make you bigger.
I don't know if you can see it.
Yeah, now
I think it was a dragonfly. I'm not 100% sure because I posted it on.
You're cheating. You're not allowed to ask dragonfly questions at a marine. No, of course you are. It looks.
You mentioned dragonfly a good few times.
through the blurry image I can see on the screen, it looks like it's either a common hawker or a migrant hawker. But you'd actually have to send me the picture, email me the picture, so I can tell which it is. Basically, the difference between the migrant hawker and the common hawker is the common hawker is bigger, and the migrant hawker, if you look on the back of the animal, it has this weird golf tee shaped mark just on the second segment on the back of the animal. Looks like a yellow or a white golf tee. But if you email me the picture, I hopefully we'll be able to tell what it is.
Cool. Next question is, I seem to be coming across squid and also octopus, which is...
Yeah, we've had quite a few actual octopus and squid records this year.
Yeah, all right.
And it's one of those things. I don't know, is that normal or not? Because we don't really have a baseline data set.
Okay, interesting. Yeah.
But I do notice that's mostly happened within the last month or two.
Yeah.
So I don't know if it's weather related or if it's a seasonal thing. Time will tell. But again, please submit the record. Take your best guess at the squid species. Squid are not my forte, so I normally go to a colleague in the Marine Institute who identifies them lickety split for me. But submit it. You can submit it basically as any squid species if you like, and we'll validate that record. But
it was literally a squid on one day, and then the very next day I found an octopus walking along the beach.
out for a walk. Maybe they do that
for a stroll. Yeah.
Maybe they do that every year. You know.
I was trying to teach him to pick up litter, but he was having none of it.
I mean, actually, if I can just quickly, if that's all right, I'm not going to get shouted at. Share a screen. One of the things I love about this project, and people say, "What's the most interesting thing you encounter in this project?" One of the thing is just the random stuff people send in. So just show you a few quick photographs. This one was fantastic. This one was sent in from County Clare, I think. That's Circulana crankii, which always reminds me of the crankies. I am that old as well. But it looks like a space alien. Look at that. It's actually a type of isopod, and it was found in a crab pot off the West Coast. But it's just such a funky looking thing. And it's the first time I'd seen it, I'll really admit. We've had a lot of records of these crop up this year. So this is the boy barnacle. And they're like the normal goose barnacle, except they make their own little float. Years ago when I worked at sea and we did surveys at sea, we used to see them everywhere. And we always called them fried egg goose barnacles because they were all flattened. They just panned out like a fried egg with the yolk in the middle. And you'd see them floating around the sea in their thousands, literally in their thousands. Another one, you say octopus. Here's someone sent in an octopus from, I think this was down at Sandy, near the 40 foot, just walking around the rock pools, having a day out kind of thing, you know, nothing unusual there. We only have one species of octopus that's encountered in Ireland, and that's the curled octopus. You'll notice it's quite a small octopus. It has curled tentacles and a single row of suckers. So that's the species you're going to encounter. And I'll show you maybe one more. I was quite proud of this one, actually. My 6-year-old, I was walking down the beach the other day, and my 6-year-old daughter came up to me with this thing, and I'd seen pictures of it, but I'd never found one on the beach here. It's actually a type of top shell called a turban top shell. You can see where it gets its name. It looks almost like a Danish pastry. And when I checked the database, we only have 12 records in the entire database. It's not that they're that uncommon. It's just that they're very infrequently recorded. So stuff like that makes my day, you know, just random things that you don't frequently see and that we've very few records of. Doesn't mean they're that rare. It just means that because we're suffering from a lack of baseline data, because we're suffering from a lack of marine records, we don't see them all that frequently. So we're always trying to get people just to give marine biodiversity data recording a go. Don't be scared of it. Give it a go. There's nothing to lose.
Brilliant. We had a question from Kieran there. I think he had his hand up.
Yeah, thank you. Firstly, thanks Clean Coast and Dave for putting this together. It's great to see everyone enjoying the sharing of information. And for Mr. Ferguson and Dave, if you haven't seen My Octopus Teacher yet, you've got to check it out.
You know, it's sitting there on Netflix shouting at me every night, and I'm kind of going, I'll save it for the weekend. So this weekend, I'm going to watch it this weekend.
Man, it's unbelievable. And then I see Alex is here from Sea Shepherd Ireland. Another documentary which might not be in general release yet, but it's phenomenal, is called Sea of Shadows, and it's about the vaquita cetacean in the Gulf of Mexico in the Sea of Cortez. phenomenal documentary as well. So that would be just an opening comment on those two. And then to get to the point I wanted to make was, I'm sure everyone here has a common interest, as we can tell, the fact we're all on this webinar together, on the coastline, on species, Irish species. Unfortunately, what I've found is the most common thing I find on a beach is litter, plastic, all that crap. Hand up, a hand poll if you've got that frustration and that problem. If everyone just put their hand up if you've got that same problem. So everyone pretty much has seen that. There's an app called Open Litter Map, and Dave, you might be aware of it if you're involved in citizen science. I've been using it since May, and it's fantastic. And I've gotten to know Sean, the guy who developed it. He's got no funding after 65 attempts. I've got my corporation involved, and we're going to try and get some funding directed to him to help him, the company I work for. But moreover, given your experience, Dave, is that something you could guide Sean from Open Litter Map on how to secure funding? He needs a bit of mentoring, just the power of it. I believe in what you're doing in citizen science. That is the way to change people's perception of things, to educate them, to get them engaged, to gather data. And the power that Open Litter Map has, the potential. And also that's the conservation part then for saving species from ropes and nets and litter on the beach.
Yeah. No, I mean, absolutely. It's a common theme throughout all citizen science is the difficulty of funding it. You know, I've been running the IWDG ferry surveys since 2001, and the only reason those surveys are still going is because of the ferry companies. Now they don't fund it in terms of giving us wads of cash, but in fact, you know, what they give us is cash in kind. They provide us with free passage on their ships, and indeed, when we were surveying down to France, we were getting thousands of pounds worth of free passage on their vessels each year. It's very difficult to get citizen science funded, or it has been to date. Now, I see Sean at quite a few European citizen science workshops, network meetings. And it seems to me that the tide is changing in Europe as regards to citizen science funding. I think Europe is beginning, the EU specifically, is beginning to see more and more the value of it. But it is still a struggle. You know, like I say, most of the citizen science projects I've been involved in either are funded by an NGO, as they are in terms of the Irish Whale and Dolphin Group was funded by the IWDG, and then you might get bits and pieces of funding here and there throughout the years. But the main long-term fund that enabled it to keep going was the group itself. So obviously, that's why a lot of citizen science happens within NGOs, because they're able to give that kind of stability to a citizen science project. It is tough. Do I have advice to offer? Not really is the honest answer. I mean, albeit I would say that the tide does seem to be changing, or Europe especially seems to be more open. And indeed, for apps like the Open Litter app is quite a good candidate for funding because it's Europe-wide. And that's the kind of project that's going to get funded at a European level. They're not so much interested in funding national citizen science projects as such. They want to see EU-wide citizen science. So I think it will happen eventually, but I have no idea at what time scale it happens. I mean, even our projects are funded for 3 years, but after 3 years, we have to go looking around for more funding to see if we can continue them. So unfortunately, we're all in the same kind of ship to some degree, but I'm optimistic for the future. I'm optimistic that in the near future that attitude is going to change, and we're going to see more kind of startup funding for citizen science at the European level, but also more long-term funding. And I think the kind of projects that do long-term funding for are those Europe-wide projects. That seems to be their main interest. So it's an optimistic future, I think.
Thanks, Dave.
Great. Thanks everybody for your questions.
Alex has his hand up there.
Oh, sorry. We just take one last question then.
Oh, sorry.
one last one, please. One last one.
Go on.
One last question.
Thank you very much. Dave, thank you very much, first of all, for the speech. Very interesting. My question is, if you have like a baseline yeah, and you see like species disappearing from our shores, yeah,
Mhm.
will you have a kind of, let's say, alarm system to actually inform, like, let's say, our minister for the fishing industry, etc. Yeah, as I saw now, I know Sea Shepherd, controversial, yes, but
Not so much.
mm, some doesn't like us, some like us.
I spent a lot of my last job doing beach cleans up in Northern Ireland with the guys from Sea Shepherd.
Good. No, my question is, as I thought, like in our borders of fishing, yeah, we are securing like bluefin tuna, yeah. But in the same stage, last week we had a huge fleet of Japanese ships fishing bluefin tuna in front of our doors. So that makes no sense to me, but it will show you that more and more outside, let's say outside countries coming in and will change our coastline. Is there any alarm system for this? What actually goes then with your data to the government to say, listen, guys, something is wrong here?
But there's a whole range. I mean, that is one big driver for building a baseline data set, in that what we'd like to develop is some monitoring indices for marine, especially coastal marine. You know, when you talk about fisheries, the fact is, whether you agree with it or not, and I'm sure people will vary on their opinion based on which angle they're coming from, commercial fisheries management is all done on an EU level through the Common Fisheries Policy or through INCAT or whatever the international agreement is. But for coastal marine species, a lot of it is because it's not protected, it's not a priority for survey. So a lot of the issue is we've no idea what's happening around the coast. We've no idea what. Take any particular species you like. Take top shells. Take turban top shells. Are they increasing? Are they decreasing? Or are they steady in terms of abundance and distribution? We have no idea because we don't have the data. And for so many species, we saw the European report on the state of the European environment come out recently, and one of the big news stories from that was that they were flagging the fact that for so many marine species, we just have nowhere near sufficient data to do any sort of assessment on whether they're in good conservation status or not. So we need to build that baseline data set, and then we need to build a monitoring. The longer term goal is to build a monitoring network of some description so that we can do monitoring of coastal marine species and specifically intertidal marine species. And the hope there would be that, yes, then if the indices were not looking good, you would start calling for action. So if you take an example on the terrestrial side and look at the Irish pollinator plan, there's an example of where many years of terrestrial monitoring data has started to have an impact and a throw forward, I would say, into people's mindset on what we need to do to protect nature. And we're seeing more and more people taking action to protect pollinators, even if my wife says it's just me being lazy and not cutting the grass. I dispute that. But it's been heartening to see how many people and how many companies have got involved in the pollinator plan and have started taking action. So we're a long way off that for coastal marine biodiversity, but hopefully we'll get there in the not too distant future.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dave. So yeah, just massive thanks to Dave for coming on and giving us loads of info, and we'll send around an email to everybody with any of those links that we have. And thanks everybody for joining us. And I know a lot of people suggested apps in the chat, so we can also take some of the info out of the chat and we can share that with everybody. So just thanks so much for all of that. And Dave, maybe we'll be able to get you back sometime to talk about something else. I'm sure you've got a wealth of knowledge you could tell us all about. So
always happy to come back and just visit the website, exploreyourshore.ie.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks everybody, and good night.
Good night. Bye. Thanks for coming.